The second instrument related to transportation security policy making in US is called federal budget process. Okay, um, not like authorizing legislation. Uh, Federal budget process is not about passing bills. Instead, it is about how to find and spend money. Because after all, without money, without funding, no policy can be made and no policy can be implemented. So in United States, okay, federal budget process provides a method for the president and the Congress to decide how to raise and spend money. So there are actually two processes, or say two sub-processes under federal budget process. So these two processes are decided, or you can say this: the president is responsible for one process, and the Congress is responsible for another process. Okay, so the president specifically is responsible for presidential budget process. Okay, the Budgeting and Accounting Act, created in 1921, requires that the president to submit an annual budget to Congress. And this process is before the Congress budget process every year. It also creates this act of the Budget and Accounting Act of 1921, also creates the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and Government Accountability Office, GAO. Okay, it used to be General Accounting Office, but now it's GAO. So the specific timeline of a presidential budget process is as below. Okay, so issuance of general budgetary guidelines to federal agencies in the spring, which means that these guidelines are issued to federal agencies in spring of every year by White House, right? And then agencies then formulate their own recommendations in consultation with OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and submit budget requests to OMB by early fall. So, all federal agents, they have a spring, summer, and a little bit time in fall to form their own recommendations and submit their own budget requests to OMB. Okay, and then final decision from the president and OMB needs to be made by the end of December, and a final budget is submitted to Congress by early February, which is right now, which means that the final budget from the president should have been submitted to Congress right now for next fiscal year, which is fiscal year 2021, right? So, for example, here is an example of president's fiscal year 2014 budget request for the Department of Homeland Security and the Transportation Security Administration, TSA. So be careful here. All figures here, they are in thousands. Okay. Let's just check some numbers here. So for fiscal year 2012, the final budget was what? 59 billion. Okay, this is $59 billion for Department of Homeland Security. And in 2014 fiscal year, the proposed funding was still 59 billion, but it's less than 2012. This is the difference. $208 million. it's a decrease. It's a decrease. And for TSA itself, you can say the funding is much less because TSA is only a small part of Department of Homeland Security. So it was $7 billion, still a big number, but not as big as the total budget of DHS, right? So it's $7 billion. $7 billion. Okay. And for fiscal year 2014, still $7 billion, but less than 2012. Here is the difference. Here is the difference. So if you calculate the ratio between $7 billion, $184 million and this 59 billion $971 billion, you can say that the budget of TSA is only a small part of DHS. Okay. And for fiscal year 2014, a total of 5.218 billion was requested for TSA aviation security. So you can say that 5 out of $7 billion, okay, were for aviation security. That's more than half of TSA budget for that specific year, right? So you can say the focus of TSA is still aviation security. Okay, and within this $5.218 billion, 2.722 billion in direct discretionary appropriations, 2.246 billion in offsetting collections, 250 million in mandatory spending from the Aviation Security Capital Fund. So you can, if you compare these 2 years, 2014 and 2012, the budget of DHS and the budget of TSA both decreased. But in general, their funding increases every year. But you can say that if you check back a little bit, right after 9/11, 9/11, right after the establishment of DHS, you can see a huge increase in budget for DHS and the TSA. But after that, the funding decreases sometime, increases sometime, but the trend is increasing. The trend is increase in budget for DHS and the TSA. Okay. So again, it's crisis driven. Right after 9/11, the budget was abundant, but after that, stable, but not increasing continuously. Okay. So let's talk about congressional budget process because we just discussed the presidential budget process, right? So before the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974, Congress lacked a comprehensive counterpart to the president's budget, with its own budgetary framework being simply the sum of all its actions on appropriations, revenue, and mandatory spending bills. Okay, so after 1974, the congressional budget process was created. Okay, so again, the timeline. Okay, yearly Congressional Budget Office is to submit its analysis of the economic and budgetary outlook to the House and Senate budget committees by February 15 of each year. So by February 15, the final budget from the president has been submitted to the Congress, right? If you compare to the former timeline here, right? So a final budget is submitted to Congress by early February. So the congressional budget process is after presidential budget process each year, okay? And then other congressional committees are to provide the budget committees with estimates of their own anticipated spending, because Congress is formed by, of course, two parties, but there are a lot of committees overseeing different aspects of this country. Okay, and you will say, who are the members of these committees? Representatives and senators, of course, right? Depending on their background, depending on their expertise, they are assigned to different committees. And what's the main job of different committees? They're overseeing through different methods. For example, hearing, right? Congress hearing. Okay, let's get back to the story. This different congressional committees, they have to estimate their own spending and revenue actions for the upcoming fiscal year within 6 weeks of the submission of the president's budget, right? Like I said, president's budget has been submitted by February 15. And after that, these committees, they have to estimate their own spendings for the next year. And each budget committee must develop a budget resolution. And the final decisions of the resolution must be submitted by April 15. It's in the middle of spring, right? And the next instrument after the budgeting process is called appropriations legislation. So you can see from the name that this is still about money, right? Fundings. So it provides agencies with budgetary authority for specified purposes, and allows federal agencies to authorize payments to be made out of the US Treasury. So you have to submit budgets first, and then the Congress can provide appropriations for specific programs, right? So that's the logic here. So firstly, a budget process, presidential budget process, congressional budget process, then appropriations legislation, right? So how to manage money, how to raise money, then how to spend money, right? So there are different bills in appropriations legislation. First one is regular appropriations bills. Separate measures provide budget authority for the coming fiscal year beginning October 1st. It's weird here in US that the beginning of the fiscal year is October 1st, because for a lot of countries, it's just the beginning of a calendar year, which is January 1st. But in US, it's October 1st, which means that no matter, of course, presidential budget process should be ended by early February, right? That's when the president should submit the final budget to the Congress. And for the congressional budget process, final decisions of the resolutions should be made by April 15. And the new fiscal year, of course, will begin on October 1st. So right now, we are in fiscal year 2022, right? 2022, because no, we're still in the fiscal year of 2021, and by the end of October 1st, the budget for fiscal year 2022 should be decided, right? Yeah, that's the logic. So there are regular appropriation bills, and there is a special type for a regular appropriation bills. It's called omnibus appropriations bills. They are a special type of regular appropriations which result when more than one bill are combined together. You will see that later, that Department of Homeland Security is usually authorized, to appropriations for DHS is yearly through omnibus appropriations bills. And there are also continuing resolutions provide for continuation of funding for a specific time period for those agencies whose regular appropriation bills have not been enacted by October 1st. It happens, I think it happens a lot. The budget is not decided. The final decision for the budget is not decided by October 1st. But these agencies cannot, some agencies, I mean, most governmental agencies, they cannot be shut down because the new budget has not been passed. So you still need funding to pay people to work for the government, right? Here is one the continuing resolutions step in. So they can provide some funding before appropriation bills are enacted. Okay, and then we have supplemental appropriation bills. They may be considered at any time and generally provide additional funding to meet unforeseen needs or to increase resources for select activities previously funded in the regular appropriations bills. This is also natural, right? When you do the budget, you will try to be as accurate as possible, right? But sometimes accidents happen or something went wrong, and you find out that the funding you applied with the budget is simply not good enough. You need more money. You need more funding to sustain the program. Then here comes the supplemental appropriations bills, which means you request more money from the federal government to continue the program, right? So for DHS, because DHS is most related to transportation security, right? So DHS was founded in time for its first years of operations from fiscal years 2004 to 2007, right after 9/11. Again, it's crisis driven, right? Right after 9/11, people were scared. The government took care of anti-terrorism very seriously. I'm not saying that the government is not taking care of anti-terrorism seriously right now, but not as seriously as right after 9/11 anymore, right? So for fiscal year 2008, DHS appropriations were folded into an omnibus appropriations bill that was signed into law December 26, 2007. You can say it's almost 3 months late than the beginning of the new fiscal year. Okay, for fiscal year 2011, DHS appropriations were ultimately provided for through an ACE continuing resolution for that year, signed into law on April 15, 2011. Okay, appropriations of DHS were provided not by normally bills, but through an ACE continuing resolution for that year, which means that the funding was simply not good enough, and DHS requested more funding for 8 times. Okay, so for fiscal year 2012, 13, and 14, all DHS appropriations were folded into omnibus bills. And of course, the funding was late for all the 3 fiscal years. 3 months, how many? 6 months, 4 months late than the beginning of the fiscal year. So you can say DHS is doing a fine job defending this country from terrorism. But there is also a lot of problems within this department, right? It's too big. It should be reauthorized, but it never happened. And the funding of DHS I mean, there is always funding for DHS, but you can see that the funding of them cannot be easily received, cannot be easily passed. Okay, so this is DHS. So within DHS, it's also difficult to allocate fundings. Okay, within DHS, determining precise funding levels for transportation security programs has also been difficult. Several reasons, right? First one, changes in agency accounting, complex relationship with DOT, because a DOT is also responsible, partially responsible for transportation security. And the TSA was originally from DOT, if you remember. Okay, so the relationship between DHS and DOT makes the allocating of fundings of DHS very difficult. And also reorganizations within DHS. For example, the shifting in fiscal year 2006 of transportation specific research and development from TSA to the DHS Science and Technology Division. Right? We talked about this division of DHS is responsible for research, not only for transportation, but transportation software and hardware and the research of them, improving them. These responsibilities, they belong to Science and Technology Division of DHS. And this task was a part of the task of TSA until this division was created within DHS, or say the division was there, but it was not their responsibility for transportation research. So you can say the shifting of tasks between between different divisions and offices within DHS also makes the allocating of fundings within DHS difficult. So you can say why I said that DHS is not like a bloated monster. It's just too big. It needs to be streamlined, reauthorized to adapt to the new scenarios, but it never happened. The reason is again that this department is just too big. It's so hard to change the structure, to improve it. Okay, and also growth in the TSA budget accounts for transportation threat assessment and credentialing and security support. Both contain non-model specific programs and activities that fall into more than one model category. So in summary, all these reasons, all these bullet points, they're indicating that the DHS itself is just too complex to efficiently allocating fundings to different divisions and offices within DHS. Okay, that's a fact. That's a fact. The trends of transportation security spending by U.S. government for the first years of DHS. Okay, funding for transportation security continued to rise. Although we saw that table, right? If you compare fiscal year 2012 and 14, the budget for DHS and TSA actually decreased, but the trend is that the funding is the funding is increasing. The funding continues to rise, but at a slower rate of increase than the immediate aftermath of 9/11. Like I said, crisis-driven, right? Aviation security remains the predominant recipient of federal support, of course, because 9/11 was about the attacks on aviation transportation, right? Maritime security funding has risen slightly, but still accounts for 1/5 of total spending. And the land mode still trails far behind the other two in terms of funding levels. Okay,